I don't know who said that, but you were correct. It's actually a Baptist church during the 1800s, and it had a preacher and a deacon. Well, the preacher didn't like the deacon very much because the deacon very much liked the preacher's wife. So in order to get revenge, the preacher burnt the church to the ground. In order to get revenge on his wife, the preacher burnt the church to the ground with her inside. Now, I don't know of any county judge that would have convicted him at the time. He was obviously a scorned man done wrong. The problem was she was not alone begging for forgiveness. She was inside teaching a make-up Sunday school class with 8 small children. And everybody perished. Well, back then, they didn't have due process. There was no devil made me do it and this nonsense. Back then, we had hanging parties. They would corral up a bunch of people and they'd find you and drag you to the hanging tree beside Captain Tony's on Green Street. And you had from the time they found you to the time they got you to the hanging tree to convince them of your innocence. Now, the preacher ran for his life and he absolutely escaped. Nobody knows whatever happened to him. They rebuilt the church, but it burnt down again in the fire of 1886. Back in 1886, our fire truck was being repaired in New York City when a fire broke out just on the other side of Fleming Street by the Marrero Guest House, which is another haunted building. But that fire went unchecked for quite some time. It burnt down most of Old Town, including this church. It was rebuilt again, and it burnt down again. By this point, locals in town were saying that this building could not remain standing because it was the site of where the priest's marriage went wrong, and his spirit would not allow it. So please do not flick your cigarette butts over there, because if that catches on fire, I'm pretty sure they're going to blame me. Now, back about 12 years ago, it was rebuilt again, this time with masonry, something not so likely to burn down, and a bunch of actors and musicians called it Club Chameleon. They bought it to stage things like music recitals and plays, things of this nature. They were not there long before they started experiencing some ghostly occurrences. At the ends of shows, they would hear children crying in the aisles, thinking somebody had possibly misplaced their kid, forgotten them, stumbled out a little bit tipsy. They'd wander up and down the aisles looking for these missing children, and of course they never found them. Also, there was an orchestra conductor, and she would come into town from time to time, and when she did, she would sleep upstairs. Well, she'd be woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of organ music. There's no longer a pipe organ in this building, and the sound tech guys would typically turn everything off before they left the building, so she'd come down to investigate, only to find that not only was everything turned off, but the speakers were unplugged. It was not long before the disturbances started happening during the actual performances. They would have a packed house, and all of a sudden people would hear shrieking children coming from behind the stage. Very obviously, the actors were not having a daycare situation backstage, so they'd hear these blood-curdling shrieks and assume that either A, someone's being killed, or B, this building is on fire again. The whole audience would rush out into the street, and the bouncers and the actors and everybody would try to get them to come back in. After 2 years, the business failed miserably. It shut its doors. It's been unoccupied since then. Unoccupied, but not inactive. We have a lot of sightings happen here. We had a guide a couple of years ago come out here with a tour, and he did the same thing I did. He asked people to stand under that awning. We do that because, oh, you so almost got doomed. You were too fast. He asked people to stand under the awning because sometimes people experience things under there. Sometimes you smell popcorn. Sometimes you smell burning wood. Some people feel hot under there. Some people hear strange things. This guide was standing over here when he heard a very small voice in his ear say, "Stevie." Well, he looked up at this balcony window here, and there was a little greenish-blue boy standing there with his hand pressed up against the glass. So he said, "Stevie?" And the apparition said in his ear, "Steven. Steven." So he looks around to see if anybody else saw this happen, and nobody else is reacting. So he inwardly shrugs and continues on with the story. At the end of the shift, he's asking his guests, did anybody see anything while we were at the Iguana, or the Club Chameleon? And nobody said anything, so he was a little bit disappointed, but he didn't suspect anything else. He went on to his post-shift drink. Those of us that like to have post-shift drinks can appreciate that. He went on to a local bar, and he was sitting there telling this story to one of his friends. His friend was totally making fun of him, saying, "You must have put vodka in your water bottle by accident this time. You're totally crazy. That just doesn't happen." Well, about 20 minutes later, these two girls come into the bar because they saw the guy still wearing his costume and recognized him. And the girl says, "Well, I saw something, but I was embarrassed. I didn't want to say it in front of a whole bunch of strangers." And he asks her what she saw, and she told his friend the same exact story. Now, we don't know the names of the 8 children that died in that fire, but I'll bet you one of them is a little boy named Steven. One of the other things you'll notice when you cruise around Key West, after midnight, if you walk around off Duval Street, you'll notice that under little awnings, that's where you're going to find our homeless people sleeping. Now, that's mostly because, like all tropical islands, we get little showers in the middle of the night sometimes, and they don't want to get wet. You can walk down this street a million times. You will never, ever see a homeless person sleeping under this nice, cozy, dry awning. We did some research. We cruised around and asked some of our local homeless people, one in particular, Benny. He hangs out in front of our office. And word on the street is, if you try to sleep here, you will be woken by the sound of crying children and little fingers poking at you until you wake up. So that's why nobody sleeps there. Now, does anybody know about Robert the doll? Great. Let's go check out Robert's house.
Robert the doll.